Hi, my name is David Warner Matheson, and for the past 12 years I've been exploring the connections between the myths and the stars, and the evidence which demonstrates beyond doubt that the world's ancient myths, scriptures, and sacred stories are based on a common worldwide system of celestial metaphor. Those familiar with my work know that I'm not a proponent of ancient alien theories, and that in fact I've shown abundant evidence that ancient texts, which are often said to be describing alien contact, are instead celestial metaphor, describing the motions of the stars and constellations and not supposed spaceships. However, I do not rule out the fact that people see things in the night sky which are difficult to explain within the conventional paradigm, and that strange craft are sometimes seen during the day as well. Craft which can do things which seem to be well beyond what we can engineer, and even in some cases beyond what our conventional physics can explain. I have a good friend who's an airline pilot and who has seen craft on more than one occasion that defy conventional explanation, and I myself have documented things I've seen while star watching, such as the purple flash that I described seeing on 23 May 2020, a little less than a year ago, and which was also seen by a good friend who was with me at the time. Well, in the first half of the month of April 2021, I had the opportunity to be part of the Contact at the Canyons event hosted by the podcasting teams from the Grimerica Show podcast and the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, in which we went to Bryce Canyon and Zion National Park to explore and to learn from and work with master breathwork and cold work instructor Brandon Powell, and to look at the stars from one of the best stargazing locations in North America, Bryce Canyon National Park, and to discuss the connections between the myths and the stars. On the way to the event, the leaders of the trip, including myself, met up in Las Vegas, where we happened to serendipitously run into MARTY GARZA, a legend in the world of monster truck events and a researcher of UFO sightings and phenomena, who has been on the Brothers of the Serpent podcast to do a 4-part interview series discussing the many different angles of this phenomenon, the many different facets of this phenomenon. MARTY knows that I've said in the past that I believe that most or all of the sightings could be explained by the existence of secret technology, human technology, along the lines of that discussed by researchers such as Joseph Farrell and Walter Bosley. During that evening, when we were meeting up in Las Vegas with MARTY, MARTY told me words to the effect of, "You're not wrong, but there may also be more to the big picture," including the possibility that many sightings may have to do with consciousness and with dimensions beyond what we call ordinary reality. And I didn't disagree with him. Later, I had the opportunity to talk with one of the guests at the event, Linda M., who has a lot of experience in these sightings and experiences, and who also believes that these phenomena have a consciousness aspect or a non-physical or ultra-dimensional aspect to them in many cases. My understanding of what she was saying is that many phenomena involve entities or something responding to our intentions, responding to our actual intentions, whether spoken or unspoken. Now, that's not an area that is central to the research that I discuss or something that I discuss a lot, except for the fact that discussion of contact with the invisible realm, the infinite realm, or the other realm is in fact central to much of what I talk about and much of what the myths appear to be conveying to us. It's just that connecting that concept to lights in the sky or lights seen mostly at night is not something that I generally endorse or make that connection. However, as you might expect from the way I'm talking and going in this video, It turns out that in addition to seeing some glorious stars in the crystal clear night skies over Bryce Canyon, we also saw some things which I cannot easily explain and which I would like to document briefly here so that they're on the record, so to speak, and diagram them a little bit as best as I can. Our primary stargazing night at Bryce Canyon was on Friday, 9 April 2021. It was a warm day, but a cold night, with temperatures dropping down into the 20s Fahrenheit at the stargazing location, which was at an elevation of over 9,000 feet above sea level, dropping down to those temperatures after nightfall and as the night got on. And there was some snow on the ground in various places on this trip. So we started out our star tour of the sky orienting towards the north, and I was pointing out the outline of the Big Dipper. And right away, people in the group, and the group was about 40 people in total darkness, started seeing not just shooting stars in the region of the Big Dipper, but also bright flashes of different colors. I didn't see all of these because part of the time I was kind of messing with my equipment or getting my laser pointer set up, or also talking to people who were around me and who were asking specific questions in person. But I heard the crowd exclaiming as they saw them. And also on the walk down to the stargazing point in the darkness, we were walking along the trail in the darkness to the stargazing point at the canyon's rim, I did see some colored flashes in the sky to the north, just above the tree tops. This was well after sunset, and it was beginning around 9 p.m. So we did our star discussions and star myths, and it was cold, and we had pretty much wrapped it up, and people were going back up to the waiting vehicles. They were moving away from the canyon rim up to the vehicles to warm up. But one van arrived late. It was later. It had been delayed due to an incident where keys had been locked in the vehicle, and they had to wait for a locksmith. And so this was much later when this van showed up. It was around 11 p.m. or 11:20, and when they showed up, I said I would take them back down to the canyon's edge to point out the stars that they'd missed, with the glorious canyon overlook. It was just a great location to see the stars. And it was very cold at this point in the evening, and I wasn't really, I'd already in my mind figured we were done, but here comes this last group, and I said, okay, let's go back down, and I was freezing, but anyway, we went back down. And so once again, we started with an orientation towards the north and pointing out the Big Dipper and getting oriented to the stars and the terrain. And it wasn't long after that that we all saw what looked like a satellite moving through the Dipper. Now, we'd seen other satellites, and a satellite is a steady light in the sky, or what I would say is a satellite. It's not flashing like an airplane. We did see airplanes too, of course. But anyway, we saw what looked like a satellite moving through the Dipper towards the south, but growing in intensity as if it was turning on a steady light, just getting brighter and brighter, basically. A white light, like a star, but getting brighter and brighter until it was as large and as bright as the International Space Station, if you've seen that. I've seen it many times. Except it was actually a little bit brighter and larger than you typically see the ISS. And this is while it was traveling through the bowl of the Dipper towards the south. It was not flashing at all, it was steady. And as it moved past the Dipper and headed south, its brightness diminished again to the brightness of what would look like an ordinary satellite. And everyone was commenting on this object, and it continued on its path towards the constellations Virgo and Corvus, which were along the southern horizon across the canyon to the south. And then we saw, as we looked at it, that almost immediately behind it, maybe 5 degrees of arc distance behind it, maybe about the width of your hand held out at arm's length, behind it was another small, steady, satellite-looking object, very dim, following in the trail of the first object. This one didn't light up or power up its light at all. It was in fact very dim but visible, but it was tracking the first one that had lit up and staying this equal distance behind it. So it was like they were moving together. And I pointed them out with my laser pointer. In the group, I later found out the group that had gone back up to wait at the vehicles, which was most of the people, who were also, they were watching this same phenomenon. They had seen this powering up of the light, and they were all exclaiming that we must have seen it too, because I was pointing it out with my laser pointer. And they were well beyond earshot from us. They were like 800 yards up the trail through forest, up this forested trail back at the parking lot. So I don't have a good explanation for why something that appears to be a satellite would power up its brightness to such a degree for just a few seconds and then power back down. I have not seen that before. Other people have described that sort of thing before. But it can't really be explained by this object catching the sun's rays, because this was nearly midnight at the time. The object was passing through the Big Dipper, so it's not in a direction or at a time when it would catch the sun's rays. It's on the opposite side of the planet Earth from the sun. Also, I have no explanation why it would be trailed by another steady light the way that it was, a dim but steady small little light trailing it. There's no doubt about the fact that there were two of these lights moving in tandem along the same path, like two satellites trailing one another very close together, which I have never seen before. So that was difficult to explain. And it was interesting in that we were actually directing our attention towards the Big Dipper when this took place. Now, of course, you could say that the reason we saw it because we were directing our attention, we were looking in that direction. But, maybe there were other lights happening all over the sky, but we just weren't looking there. But something brightening like that brightening effect was very noticeable, and it's probably something that someone in the group would have noticed if it had happened in another part of the sky. So it's interesting, we were looking in that direction. But later, there was another phenomenon that we saw at a completely different time, more than 24 hours later, that we saw, which is even more difficult to explain. And that took place on the night of Saturday, April 10 April, or actually in the early hours of the morning of Sunday, 11 April. So this was our last night of the event. We were kind of having a party with live music performed by Russ and Kyle of the Brothers of the Serpent, along with Brandon playing on his djembe, and accompanied by some of the guests who'd brought their instruments, guitars and things. And it went late into the night. So after the music was all done, and around 3 a.m., some of the guests prevailed upon me to go out and lead one more star tour in order to, quote, see Ophiuchus, which at that time of year, it rises after midnight generally, and thus had not been very visible during the official stargazing at Bryce Canyon the night before. It was coming up later after we had all kind of called it a night the night before. So this call went up, let's go see Ophiuchus. And so we did. We all went out, well, the people who wanted to. This was late. A lot of people had already gone to bed, but we went out, a group of maybe about 15 people, and I began pointing out the constellations, orienting everybody, starting with the northern sky and the Dipper, and then coming around to face towards the south to point out Ophiuchus. And above it, Hercules, pointed out the northern crown, and Boötes in front of the northern crown. And it was at this time, it was a little after 3 a.m., one of the guests in the group noticed what appeared to be a satellite moving again in the region of the Big Dipper and heading across the sky towards the southern horizon, similar to what we'd seen the night before. And as it crossed into the central body of Ophiuchus, so that's all the way towards the southern horizon, towards the bottom of the tall rectangular body of Ophiuchus, it powered up into a bright light, just like we'd seen the night before happening in the Dipper, but this time in Ophiuchus. And then it powered back down as it proceeded along, and it just kept going along its path. But right behind it came another one not far behind. And this one also powered up as it entered Ophiuchus for a second or two. And then continued on its way and powered back down. And then another and another and another, all moving along the same line. It was like a string of pearls, little dots moving along like a string of satellites or something, all moving about 5 or 10 arc degrees behind one another, and all powering up when they reached Ophiuchus, with about 5 or 10 seconds in between each of these objects. They were about the size of a satellite, except when they powered up, they were like the the ISS size, and then, or even brighter, and then dim back down. This powering up, this string was moving along. They were like one after the other, like ducks in a row. It was so predictable that Ryan, that's who saw them first, started saying, "and now," when the next one was getting to the point where it was going to light up, and he'd be right. So you could see them when they weren't powered up, but they were very tiny and faint until they lit up brightly, and then they dimmed back to their original steady dim size. And all the time they're moving along in this like train of what look like satellites. So once again, this phenomenon cannot be really explained by objects catching the sun's rays and reflecting them, because it was literally 3 a.m., which is, is not that close to dawn. And what's most remarkable, of course, is that they were brightening when they reached Ophiuchus, which is exactly the constellation that everyone had said they wanted to go outside and see, and which I'd agreed to that, and I'd announced, to everyone in the lodge, whoever wants to come outside and see Ophiuchus, come on, let's go. So, of course, we can explain these objects as being satellites, although I've never heard of or previously observed satellites moving in this chain directly behind one another in a line of well over 10. I mean, this brightening happened, there was more than 10 times in a row. However, even if they were satellites, it's difficult to explain why they would power up to such a brightness for a second or two like that, when, as I said, I don't think it was the sun's rays at all. It was pitch black, it was night, no dawn going on at all. And then, of course, the most remarkable aspect of this observation was that they were all powering up when they reached the constellation Ophiuchus. Is that just a coincidence? That's what we were all said we were going out to see and observe. Everyone wanted to see Ophiuchus. And then this procession of lights goes right through Ophiuchus, lighting up each one as they go through it. Is that just a coincidence, or is there more to the story? I'll leave it to you to think about and decide. All I will say is that my attempts here to kind of diagram the path of these lights on a kind of, Apple keynote presentation doesn't really do a perfect job of replicating what we all saw. But there were about 15 of us who all saw this phenomenon in the early morning hours of 11 April. And that's, also that other event on the night of 9 April. So on the night of 10 April, that's the night, that we were having this party before midnight, while we were all still having this party, Russ and Kyle, after the music was done from the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, they went upstairs and set up a video link with Graham from Grimerica, who wasn't able to attend this event. And so they recorded a podcast, which anyone who wanted to talk to Graham could go do so. So it was like talking to Graham, but it was recorded. And you can hear that podcast on the Grimerica show feeds and websites. And in it, you'll hear people describing the phenomena, those flashes and those kind of bright power-up objects that we saw on the night of 9 April when we were at Bryce Canyon. However, that recording was recorded a few hours before we went out at 3 a.m. on the morning of 11 April. So it was that same night, but it was a few hours before. So the Ophiuchus Lights phenomenon is not described in that podcast. But I would definitely recommend checking out that recording of everyone talking to Graham and describing what they saw at Bryce Canyon. I personally try to remain open to different possible explanations of any evidence, as long as those explanations fit the evidence and fit other evidence. And I've used the metaphor of Sherlock Holmes or Scooby-Doo and the gang, in a mystery story, when they approach a case, staying open to where the evidence actually leads. And I think that's a good metaphor for the way we should deal with cases where the, quote, authorities tell us that things are all figured out, nothing to see here, the only possible explanation is there's only one possible explanation, that's all you should possibly entertain in your mind, don't think about any other explanations. I think it's good to keep an open mind, just as those mystery stories demonstrate with Sherlock Holmes or Scooby-Doo. that keeping an open mind. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is in this case, but it's a very interesting set of observations that we had. So this April event at Bryce and Zion Canyons was certainly a very special and memorable event for many reasons. And I wasn't really expecting to see lights in the sky that I couldn't explain, or objects in the sky, or phenomenon in the sky that I couldn't explain. But I will admit that I don't have a good explanation for them. I mean, they look, about as unusual as satellites. So it's not like it was, something that's totally inexplicable, red swirling saucers or anything like that. It was like satellites. But really, I can't explain some of those behaviors. And the fact that they were in kind of the direction that I was pointing everyone's attention, and that they were going through Ophiuchus, that we were all going out to see on early morning hours of Sunday. I do suspect that there are human-made craft which we in the general public do not know about, which we're not told about, but I don't know why or how they would power up their lights right when they reach the boundaries of constellations that we happen to be talking about and happen to be featuring in my discussion of the night sky. So thank you for listening. I hope you can attend one of these special events at these amazing geological sites on our planet with me and with the podcast hosts and the other special guests in the future. It was really memorable. And thank you for listening and staying curious. I really believe that the truth is up there when it comes to the ancient myths. That's my main area of focus. But looking at the night sky as much as I do, I have seen some things in the past that I wasn't able to explain, and this one was much more than I've ever seen before, and I really can't explain some of those things that I tried to describe to you.